"Don't sign that contract," said the cleaning lady's daughter to the powerful millionaire. "Before we dive into this incredible story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. You're about to witness how one brave 7-year-old girl changed the fate of a $1 million empire. Enjoy the journey." The Mahogany Conference. Room on the 47th floor of Blackstone Industries buzzed with tension. Richard Montgomery Blackstone, CEO and founder, sat at the head of the polished table, his steel-gray eyes scanning the final contract that would secure the biggest deal of his career. Across from him, Marcus Aldrich Valdez, his business partner of 15 years, smiled with barely contained excitement. "This is it, Richard," Marcus said, sliding the gold pen closer. "The Meridian merger will make us the largest construction firm on the East Coast. Sign here and we'll control every major project from Boston to Miami." Richard's weathered hand hovered over the signature line. At 58, he'd built this company from nothing after his wife Margaret's tragic death 10 years ago. This deal would cement his legacy. The other board members nodded approvingly as Richard lifted the pen. That's when the conference room door exploded open. "Don't sign that!" A tiny girl with wild blonde curls and bright blue eyes burst into the room, her small sneakers squeaking against the marble floor. She wore a faded pink dress and clutched a worn stuffed rabbit, her face flushed with panic and determination. "Security," Marcus barked, lunging toward the child. "How did a kid get up here?" The girl dodged Marcus's grasp with surprising agility, pointing a trembling finger at the contract. "Please, mister, that paper's gonna hurt you real bad." Richard stared, frozen. In 30 years of business, he'd never seen such raw desperation in anyone's eyes, let alone a child's. "Little girl, how did you—" "Lily Mae Thornton," a woman's voice called from the hallway. Sarah Thornton, the new night janitor, appeared in the doorway, her face pale with horror. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry, Mr. Blackstone. She must have wandered off while I was cleaning." Marcus grabbed the child's arm roughly. "Get this brat out of here before I call the police. And you're fired. Lady, pack your things and get out." But as Marcus dragged Lily toward the door, the little girl twisted in his grip and looked him straight in the eye. Her voice, though small, carried a weight that made everyone in the room pause. "You're bad," she whispered, her blue eyes blazing, with an innocence that somehow saw right through him. "I heard you talking on the phone about stealing everything from the nice man." Marcus's face went white. For just a moment, his confident mask slipped, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. The kid's obviously disturbed, probably hears voices. But Richard saw it, that flash of panic in Marcus's eyes. In 15 years of partnership, he'd never seen Marcus rattled by anything. Why would a 7-year-old's accusation affect him so deeply? "Wait," Richard said, standing slowly. His instincts, honed by decades of reading people, were screaming that something was wrong. "Lily, was it? What exactly did you hear?" Lily looked up at Richard with those impossibly blue eyes, still clutching her stuffed rabbit. The conference room had fallen silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and Marcus's increasingly heavy breathing. "The mean man was talking on his phone," Lily said, her voice clear and matter-of-fact in the way only children can manage. "He said he was going to take everything away from you with that paper. He said you'd be too stupid to notice until it was too late." Marcus forced a laugh, but sweat had formed on his brow. "Really, Richard? You're going to listen to a child's fantasy? She probably misunderstood some cartoon on TV." But Richard's business instincts were screaming. He'd built a fortune by trusting his gut, and right now, his gut was telling him that this 7-year-old girl had just saved his life. "Sarah," he said gently, "could you and Lily wait in my office? Eleanor will get you some hot chocolate." He nodded to his longtime secretary, Eleanor Grace Mitchell, who had been standing frozen in the doorway. "Of course, Mr. Blackstone," Eleanor said, extending her hand to Lily. "Come on, sweetheart. I have cookies too." As they left, Richard turned to his lawyer, Nathaniel Cooper, who had been silent throughout the commotion. "Nathaniel, I want you to review this contract word by word right now." Marcus stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is ridiculous, Richard. We've been planning this merger for months. You're going to let a child's imagination derail the biggest deal of our careers? Then you won't mind waiting while Nathaniel does his job, Richard replied coolly. For the next hour, Nathaniel pored over every line of the 100-page document while Marcus paced like a caged animal. Richard watched his partner's behavior with growing suspicion. In 15 years, he'd never seen Marcus this agitated. Finally, Nathaniel looked up, his face pale. "Richard, we need to talk privately." In Richard's office, with the door firmly closed, Nathaniel spread the contract across the desk. Page 73, subsection C. It's buried in legal jargon, but the clause effectively transfers 70% of your company shares to Marcus upon signing. It's cleverly worded to look like standard merger language, but it's anything but standard. Richard felt the blood drain from his face. "How much are we talking about?" "Your company's worth $800 million. Marcus would essentially become the majority owner overnight, with the legal right to make all major decisions without your input." Richard sank into his leather chair, staring at Lily, who was contentedly coloring at the small table in the corner. This child, this brave, innocent child, had just saved him from losing everything he'd spent 30 years building. "Lily," he said softly, "can you tell me exactly what else you heard the bad man say?" Lily looked up from her drawing. "He was real happy. He said something about finally getting what he deserved after carrying you for so long. And..." She hesitated, glancing at her mother. "It's okay, baby," Sarah encouraged. "Tell Mr. Blackstone what you heard. He said something about your wife, that she was getting too close to the truth before she died. So it was good that the accident happened when it did." The room went deadly silent. Richard's hands began to shake. Margaret, his beloved Margaret, who had died in a car accident 10 years ago. Marcus had been so supportive during that time, helping Richard through his grief, taking on more responsibilities. Richard's face had turned ashen at Lily's words about Margaret. His hands trembled as memories flooded back. Marcus appearing at the hospital, taking charge of funeral arrangements, being the shoulder to cry on. Always there, always helpful, always ready to take on more responsibility. "Lily, sweetheart," Richard said, his voice barely steady. "Did the bad man say anything else about my wife?" Before Lily could answer, the office door burst open. Marcus stormed in, his usual polished demeanor completely gone. "Enough of this circus. Richard, we're signing that contract now, or I'm calling the board to have you declared mentally unfit." Eleanor stepped protectively in front of Lily and Sarah. "Mr. Valdez, you have no right to—" "Shut up, Eleanor," Marcus snarled. "You're nothing but a secretary. You've been poisoning Richard against me for years with your paranoid suspicions." Richard stood slowly, his steel gray eyes fixed on the man he'd considered his closest friend. "Paranoid suspicions? What suspicions, Marcus?" Marcus realized his mistake immediately, but it was too late. Eleanor's voice was steady and clear. "The missing client files. The deals that mysteriously fell through after you handled them. The way you always volunteered to meet with investors alone, then reported they'd declined. I've been documenting everything for 5 years." "You kept records?" Richard asked, stunned. Eleanor nodded grimly. "In my home safe. I never trusted him, especially after Mrs. Margaret started asking questions about the company's finances right before she died." Marcus's mask finally slipped completely. The charming smile vanished, replaced by cold calculation. Margaret was getting nosy, asking to see books she had no business looking at. She was going to ruin everything I'd worked for. "Worked for?" Richard's voice rose. "You mean stolen?" "I built this company as much as you did," Marcus exploded. "While you played the grieving widower, I kept everything running. While you moped around feeling sorry for yourself, I made the real decisions. I deserve to be an equal partner, not your glorified employee." Nathaniel had been quietly recording the conversation on his phone. "Mr. Valdez, are you admitting to financial improprieties?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "Improprieties? I've been moving money, hiding assets and redirecting contracts for 10 years. Richard was too trusting and too stupid to notice. Just like he was too stupid to realize his precious Margaret's accident wasn't so accidental. The room went dead silent. Sarah gasped, pulling Lily closer. Even Lily seemed to understand the weight of what the bad man had just admitted. Richard's voice was deadly quiet. "What did you do to my wife?" "I didn't do anything," Marcus said with a cruel smile. "I just made sure her brakes weren't properly maintained. Amazing how careless mechanics can be when they're paid enough to forget their safety checks." Richard lunged forward, but Nathaniel grabbed his arm. "Richard, no. Let the law handle this." Marcus straightened his tie, regaining some composure. "Good luck proving any of this. It's your word against mine, and I control half the board. That contract is getting signed today, one way or another." But Lily stepped forward, still holding her stuffed rabbit. In her clear, innocent voice, she said, "No, it's not. Because you're bad, and bad people always get caught. My mommy told me so." Marcus looked down at the small girl with contempt. "Shut up, you little—" "Don't you dare speak to my daughter that way," Sarah said, her voice fierce with protective fury. For the first time in 10 years, Richard felt something other than grief and loneliness. He felt purpose. This innocent family had saved him from a monster he'd never recognized. After Marcus stormed out with threats of legal action, Richard found himself alone with Sarah and Lily in his office. The afternoon sun streamed through the floor to ceiling, windows casting golden light across the child's artwork scattered on his conference table. "I'm so sorry about all this, Mr. Blackstone," Sarah said quietly, gathering Lily's crayons. "We should go. I don't want to cause you any more trouble." "Wait," Richard said, surprised by how much he didn't want them to leave. "Please, you saved my life today. Both of you." He knelt down to Lily's level, something he hadn't done in years. "Lily, you're the bravest person I've ever met." Lily studied his face with those perceptive blue eyes. "You look sad all the time, even when you try to smile." The simple observation hit Richard like a punch to the chest. "I suppose I am sad. I lost someone very important to me." "Your wife," Lily said matter-of-factly. "The bad man hurt her, didn't he?" Richard nodded, unable to speak for a moment. This child saw things adults missed, spoke truths others danced around. Sarah placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "I'm sorry for your loss. Losing someone you love. It changes everything." "You sound like you know," Richard said softly. Sarah's eyes clouded briefly. "Lily's father died in Afghanistan when she was 2. Sometimes the hardest part isn't the losing. It's the living afterward." They sat in comfortable silence, 3 wounded souls who had somehow found each other. Richard watched Lily carefully coloring a drawing of what looked like a bakery with a smiling woman behind the counter. "Is that your mommy?" he asked. Lily nodded enthusiastically. "She makes the best cupcakes in the whole world. Someday she's going to have her own shop, and I'm going to help decorate the cakes." Richard looked at Sarah, who blushed. "It's just a silly dream. I work 3 jobs to keep us afloat. Opening a bakery would take money I don't have and business skills I never learned." "Dreams aren't silly," Richard said firmly. "What kind of bakery would you want?" Sarah's eyes lit up despite herself. "Something warm and cozy, where families could come for birthday cakes and comfort food, where kids like Lily could press their noses against the glass cases and pick out special treats." She caught herself and laughed. "Listen to me rambling like it could actually happen." "What if it could?" Richard asked quietly. Before Sarah could respond, Eleanor knocked and entered. "Mr. Blackstone, security escorted Mr. Valdez from the building, but he's threatening to call an emergency board meeting. Also, there's something else." She glanced meaningfully at Lily. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately." Richard shook his head. "These 2 are family now. Whatever you have to say, they can hear." Eleanor smiled, the first genuine smile Richard had seen from her in years. "Very well. I've contacted Detective William Harrison. He's with the Financial Crimes Unit. He wants to review my documentation of Mr. Valdez's activities. Also, I found this in Mr. Valdez's desk. She handed Richard a leather portfolio. Inside were photographs of Richard, obviously taken without his knowledge, with notes in Marcus's handwriting. Isolate him. Prevent new relationships. Keep him dependent. He's been watching me, Richard realized with a chill. Planning this for years. Lily tugged on his sleeve. Don't be scared. Bad people look really strong, but they're actually weak inside. That's why they have to hurt good people to feel big. Richard stared at this remarkable child. How did you get so wise? My mommy tells me stories about brave people. She says courage isn't not being scared. It's doing the right thing even when you are scared. Richard felt something crack open in his chest, a warmth he hadn't experienced since Margaret's death. Lily, would you like to see something special? Led them to a hidden door behind his bookshelf, revealing a small room with toys and children's books. This was going to be a playroom. Margaret and we were trying to have children. Sarah's eyes filled with tears at the sadness in his voice. Maybe, Richard said hesitantly, maybe it could be used the way it was meant to be. 3 days later, Richard stood in the toy aisle of Henderson's department store, completely overwhelmed. He'd built a corporate empire, negotiated billion-dollar deals, but choosing a gift for a 7-year-old girl seemed impossibly complicated. Can I help you, sir? Asked a cheerful sales clerk. I need something for a little girl. She's 7. She likes to draw and... Richard paused, realizing how little he actually knew about children. I have no idea what I'm doing. The clerk smiled, knowingly. First-time grandfather? Something like that, Richard replied, not ready to explain the complicated truth. An hour later, Richard arrived at Sarah's modest apartment carrying bags filled with art supplies, books, and what the clerk assured him was the perfect, stuffed, animal companion for Lily's worn rabbit. Sarah answered the door in flour-dusted clothes, her hair tied back with a colorful bandana. Mr. Blackstone, what's all this? Richard, please. And I thought, well, Lily saved my company. I wanted to thank her properly. Lily appeared from behind her mother, eyes wide at the packages. Are those presents? It's not my birthday. Sometimes the best gifts aren't for birthdays, Richard said, setting the bags down carefully. They're for being brave. As Lily tore into the wrapping paper with infectious enthusiasm, Richard noticed Sarah's tiny kitchen. The refrigerator was covered with past-due bills, and the cupboards looked nearly empty. Sarah, he said quietly while Lily examined her new art set, I'd like to offer you a position at Blackstone Industries, head of building services. The salary would be substantial. Sarah's cheeks flushed. That's very kind, but I couldn't accept charity. It's not charity, it's justice. And frankly, after dealing with Marcus for 15 years, I need people around me I can trust. He paused. Also, the position comes with excellent health insurance and educational benefits for dependents. Before Sarah could protest, Lily tugged on Richard's expensive suit jacket. Mr. Richard, will you help me draw a picture? For the next hour, Richard found himself on the floor, awkwardly attempting to color within the lines while Lily patiently corrected his technique. No, like this, she said, guiding his hand. Clouds are supposed to be fluffy, not square. I'm not very artistic, Richard admitted. That's okay. You just need practice. Mommy says practice makes progress, not perfect. Sarah watched from the kitchen, her heart warming at the sight of this powerful man sitting cross-legged on her worn carpet, completely absorbed in a child's approval. Lily, Richard said suddenly, would you like to see where I work tomorrow? There's the executive dining room with windows that look out over the whole city. Can Mommy come too? I was hoping she would. After all, she starts her new job Monday. That evening, as Richard drove home to his empty mansion, his phone rang. The caller ID showed Detective Harrison. Mr. Blackstone, we've made some progress on the Valdez investigation. The good news is we found evidence of financial manipulation going back 12 years. The bad news is he's gotten wind of our investigation. What does that mean? It means he's desperate, and desperate people do dangerous things. I'd recommend staying alert and keeping your new family close. Richard's grip tightened on the steering wheel. My new family? Word travels fast in police circles, sir. A janitor saves a millionaire from a corrupt partner? It's the kind of story that gives people hope. Harrison paused. Just be careful. Valdez has connections we're still uncovering. As Richard hung up, he realized Harrison was right about one thing. Sarah and Lily had become his family. For the first time in 10 years, he had something worth protecting beyond money and business deals. But across town, in a dimly lit office, Marcus Valdez was making phone calls of his own, his voice cold with rage as he spoke to shadowy contacts, who specialized in making problems disappear. Sarah's first day as head of building services began at dawn. She'd insisted on personally cleaning Richard's executive office, wanting to ensure every detail was perfect for the man who'd changed their lives. As she carefully dusted the antique desk that had belonged to Richard's father, her fingers caught on a hidden drawer that had come slightly ajar. Inside, wrapped in faded tissue paper, was a small bundle of letters tied with a blue ribbon. The elegant handwriting on the envelopes made her breath catch. Margaret Blackstone, personal and confidential. Sarah hesitated. These weren't her letters to read, but something about their hidden placement troubled her. When she noticed one envelope was dated just 3 days before Margaret's death, her concern overrode her respect for privacy. The letter was addressed to Richard, but clearly never delivered. My dearest Richard, I pray I'm wrong about Marcus, but I've discovered irregularities in our accounts that deeply disturb me. 3 major contracts show payments to shell companies that don't exist. When I questioned Marcus privately, his explanation made no sense. I'm scared, darling. Not of losing money, but of what this means about someone we've trusted for so long. I've made copies of everything and hidden them in the place where we first talked about having children. If anything happens to me, please look there. Your loving wife, Margaret. Sarah's hands trembled as she read a second letter. This one never finished. Richard, I followed Marcus to a meeting today. He was giving envelopes of cash to men who looked like... I can't even write what I suspect. I think he's been stealing from us for years, using our company to launder money for dangerous people. I've documented everything, but I'm terrified. He's noticed my investigation. I'm going to confront him tomorrow and demand he leave the company. If he refuses, I'll have no choice but to call the police. I love you so much. If anything should happen... The letter ended abruptly, the pen trailing off the page. Sarah rushed to Richard's office, finding him reviewing legal documents with Nathaniel Cooper. Richard, you need to see this immediately. As Richard read Margaret's final words, his face cycled through disbelief, grief, and burning rage. She knew. She died trying to protect our company, trying to protect me. There's more, Sarah said gently. She mentions hiding copies somewhere special. Something about where you first talked about having children. Richard's eyes widened with sudden understanding. The garden gazebo. We planned our whole future. There. He turned to Nathaniel. Call Detective Harrison, tell him to meet us at my house in 1 hour. At the Blackstone estate, they found Margaret's hidden evidence exactly where her letter indicated. Behind a loose stone in the gazebo's foundation was a waterproof container filled with financial documents, photographs of Marcus with known criminals, and a detailed journal documenting years of suspicious transactions. This is extraordinary, Detective Harrison said, examining the evidence. Your wife essentially built an entire case against Valdez before her death. These photos alone link him to the Torino crime family. Eleanor, who had accompanied them, gasped. The Torinos. They're the ones who were investigated for that construction bid rigging scandal 5 years ago. The same, Harrison confirmed. It appears Marcus has been using Blackstone Industries to legitimize dirty money through fake construction contracts. He looked at Richard grimly. Your wife didn't die in an accident, Mr. Blackstone. She was murdered because she got too close to exposing a major money laundering operation. Richard sat heavily on the gazebo bench where he'd once planned a life with Margaret. 10 years of grief had just transformed into cold, focused determination for justice. Lily, who had been quietly exploring the garden with her new art supplies, suddenly appeared at Richard's side. "Don't be sad, Mr. Richard. She's still watching, over you. That's why she left all those clues for you to find." Sarah placed a comforting hand on Richard's shoulder as he struggled with the revelation. Margaret was braver than any of us knew. Detective Harrison closed his evidence kit. "Mr. Blackstone, with this documentation, we can build a case that goes far beyond corporate fraud. But I have to warn you, if Marcus realizes what we've found, he'll become extremely dangerous. The Torino family doesn't leave loose ends." If summoned by their conversation, Richard's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "I know you found her little treasure hunt. Back off now, or your new family will join Margaret." After Marcus's threatening text, Richard made an immediate decision. "Detective Harrison, I want round-the-clock protection for Sarah and Lily, and I'm moving them somewhere Marcus can't find them." "Richard, that's not necessary," Sarah protested. "We can't hide forever." "You're not hiding," Richard said firmly. "You're giving me time to make Marcus's threats irrelevant." He turned to Eleanor with a determined smile. "Remember that commercial property on Maple Street? The one with the big front windows?" Eleanor's eyes lit up with understanding. "The old Rosenberg bakery building? It's been empty for 2 years." "Not anymore. I want it purchased, renovated, and fully equipped within 1 month." Richard knelt down to Lily's level. "How would you like to help your mom open the most beautiful bakery in the city?" Lily's shriek of joy echoed through the garden. "Really? Mommy's dream bakery? With the big glass cases and the smell of fresh bread?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Richard, I can't let you do this. It's too much." "It's not nearly enough," Richard replied softly. "Besides, I need a good investment. The food industry is remarkably stable." He winked at Lily. "Especially when the head decorator is the most artistic 7-year-old in the state." 3 weeks later, Sarah stood in the doorway of her dream come true. The building had been transformed into a cozy wonderland of warm woods, vintage fixtures, and display cases that sparkled like jewelry stores. The sign above the door read, "Sweet Sarah's Bakery," in cheerful blue letters, with small painted flowers that Lily had designed. "It's perfect," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. The grand opening drew half the neighborhood. Richard had quietly arranged for the local newspaper to cover the story, and word had spread about the single mother whose courage had saved a millionaire's empire. Eleanor manned the register while Sarah proudly displayed her homemade cupcakes, cookies, and fresh bread. Lily wore a tiny apron that matched her mother's, solemnly explaining to each customer how she'd helped choose the colors and arrange the displays. "This is my favorite," she told an elderly woman, pointing to a tray of chocolate chip cookies. "Mommy makes them with extra love." Richard watched from a corner table, feeling a warmth in his chest he'd forgotten existed. This was what happiness looked like. Not corporate victories or financial gains, but the simple joy of making someone's dreams come true. "You did good, boss," Eleanor said, joining him with 2 cups of Sarah's specially blended coffee. "I haven't seen you smile like this since before Mrs. Margaret died." "Margaret would have loved this," Richard replied. "She always said success meant building something that makes people happy." As the afternoon wore on, Richard noticed Sarah stealing glances at him between customers. When the crowd finally thinned, she approached his table with a plate of fresh apple turnovers. "Thank you," she said simply. "For everything. For believing in dreams I thought were impossible." "Thank you for saving my life," Richard replied. "Both of you." Sarah leaned down and gently kissed his cheek, a gesture so tender it made his heart race like a teenager's. "We're family now," she whispered. "Real family." Lily bounded over, flour in her hair and frosting on her nose. "Mr. Richard, do you want to help me decorate the cake for tomorrow? It's for Mrs. Henderson's grandson's birthday." "I'd be honored," Richard said, meaning every word. As the sun set over Maple Street, with the bakery's warm lights glowing and the 3 of them working together in the kitchen, Richard felt complete for the first time in a decade. But across town, Marcus Valdez was on the phone with Antonio Torino, his voice cold with fury. "I don't care what it costs. I want that bakery burned to the ground, and I want it to look like an accident. Time to remind Blackstone what happens when people don't cooperate." The Torino lieutenant's gravelly voice was matter-of-fact. "What about witnesses?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "No witnesses." 2 blocks away from the bakery, a black sedan pulled up to the curb, its occupants watching the happy family through the bright windows, waiting for the perfect moment to destroy everything Richard had just learned to love. The attack came at dawn on a Tuesday, swift and brutal in its precision. Sarah was preparing the morning's first batch of croissants when 6 police officers burst through the bakery's front door, badges gleaming under the warm lights she'd grown to love. "Sarah Thornton, you're under arrest for corporate espionage and theft of confidential documents," announced Detective Morrison, a man whose cold eyes suggested he wasn't part of Harrison's honest crew. "What?" Sarah dropped her mixing bowl, flour exploding across the kitchen floor. "There must be some mistake." "No mistake, ma'am. We have a warrant to search these premises for stolen Blackstone Industries property." Morrison held up official-looking papers. "You're also being charged with manipulating a mentally unstable elderly man for financial gain." Lily, who had been arranging flowers in the front window, began to cry as officers roughly handcuffed her mother. "Mommy, what are they doing to Mommy?" "It's okay, baby," Sarah called desperately as they dragged her toward the door. "Call Mr. Richard. Tell him I wouldn't count on Mr. Blackstone's help." Morrison interrupted with a cruel smile. "He's got his own legal problems now." Within an hour, the local news trucks arrived. By noon, the story was everywhere. "Cleaning Lady Khan's grieving millionaire." The headlines painted Sarah as a manipulative gold digger who had used her innocent daughter to exploit a lonely widower's grief. Richard sat in his lawyer's office, furious and helpless, as Nathaniel explained the legal trap Marcus had so carefully constructed. "It's diabolical," Nathaniel said grimly. "Marcus filed a complaint claiming Sarah stole confidential documents when she found Margaret's letters. Technically, she did remove them from company property without authorization. He's also got 3 board members willing to testify that your behavior has been erratic since meeting her. That's insane. Sarah saved my company." "The law doesn't always care about intentions, Richard. Marcus has also obtained a restraining order claiming you're being manipulated by an unstable woman who's using her child as emotional leverage. You're legally prohibited from contacting Sarah or Lily until this is resolved." Richard's phone buzzed, with text after text from news outlets wanting his comment on the exploitation scandal. Each headline was more vicious than the last: "Millionaire's midlife crisis and how a pretty face fooled a fortune." At Child Protective Services, Lily sat in a sterile waiting room, clutching her stuffed rabbit and the small drawing she'd made of her, Richard, and her mother as a family. A social worker with kind but tired eyes knelt beside her. "Lily, honey, we need to find you a safe place to stay while your mommy sorts out her legal troubles. Do you have any other family?" "I want Mr. Richard," Lily said firmly. "He's my family, now." "I'm sorry, sweetheart, but that's not possible right now. The judge says Mr. Blackstone might not be thinking clearly." Meanwhile, Eleanor sat in the Blackstone Industries lobby, a cardboard box of her personal belongings beside her. Marcus approached with a victorious smile. "Cleaning out your desk, Eleanor? Good. Your loyalty to Richard's questionable judgment made your position here untenable." "You won't get away with this," Eleanor said quietly. "Truth has a way of surfacing." "Truth is whatever people believe," Marcus replied smoothly. "And right now, people believe Richard Blackstone is a lonely, old fool who got taken advantage of by a clever little family of con artists." That evening, Richard stood alone in his mansion, surrounded by the toys he'd bought for Lily and the business plans he'd made for expanding Sarah's bakery. Everything they'd built together was crumbling, and Marcus's web of corruption was using the very system meant to protect people against them. His phone rang. Detective Harrison's voice was grim. "Richard, I'm calling from a secure line. Morrison isn't one of ours. He's on Marcus's payroll. The whole arrest was orchestrated, but proving it will take time we don't have." "How long?" Sarah's hearing is tomorrow morning. If the judge believes Marcus's narrative, she could be looking at 5 years in prison. And Lily? Harrison paused. They're placing her in foster care tonight. Through his window, Richard could see news vans still parked outside his gates, waiting to capture his downfall. Marcus had played his hand perfectly, turning Richard's greatest joy into his most devastating weakness. The little girl who had saved his empire was now lost in a system designed to protect her from him. The courtroom was packed with reporters as Judge Patricia Carmichael read the charges against Sarah. Richard sat in the back row, legally prohibited from approaching, but unable to stay away. Sarah looked small and vulnerable in her orange jumpsuit, her hands shaking as she listened to Marcus's lawyers paint her as a calculating manipulator. "Your Honor," the prosecutor declared, "Ms. Thornton systematically exploited Mr. Blackstone's grief and isolation. She used her 7-year-old daughter as bait to gain access to confidential corporate information, which she then used to orchestrate an elaborate con game." Richard's heart broke watching Sarah's face crumble as witness after witness testified against her character. 3 board members claimed they'd seen her coaching Lily on what to say. A false witness claimed Sarah had bragged about landing a rich sucker. When the judge denied bail, citing flight risk, Richard felt his world collapse completely. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed him like vultures. "Mr. Blackstone, do you feel foolish for being manipulated by a janitor? How much money did you lose to this woman? Do you regret trusting a child's word over your business partners?" Richard pushed through the crowd without comment, his security team helping him reach his car. As they drove away, he saw Marcus on the courthouse steps giving an interview to the cameras. "I tried to warn Richard," Marcus was saying, his face a mask of false concern, "but he was so lonely after his wife's death that he became vulnerable to this kind of manipulation. I just hope he can get the help he needs." That evening, Richard sat alone in his mansion, the silence deafening. Eleanor had been escorted from the building. His own board of directors had voted to place him on indefinite medical leave, citing emotional instability. The company his father had built, that he'd spent 30 years growing, was now under Marcus's complete control. His phone rang constantly with calls from reporters, lawyers, and former business associates offering hollow sympathy, while clearly distancing themselves from the scandal. He stopped answering after the 5th call. The worst part was Lily. Richard drove past the Sunshine foster home where she was staying, watching through the fence as she sat alone on a swing, clutching her stuffed rabbit. When she saw his car, she ran to the fence, pressing her small face against the chain link. "Mr. Richard, please take me home. I want my mommy." The social worker quickly pulled her away, shooting Richard a disapproving look. He was now legally classified as a potential threat to the child who had saved his life. At midnight, Richard found himself in Margaret's garden, sitting on the bench where they'd discovered her evidence just weeks ago. Everything felt like a cruel dream. He'd had a family, a purpose, a chance at happiness. And Marcus had destroyed it all with surgical precision. "I failed them," he whispered to Margaret's memory. "I failed you. I failed Sarah. I failed Lily. I let a monster destroy everyone I cared about." The weight of his isolation pressed down like a physical force. No family, no friends, no allies. Even Detective Harrison had warned him to stay away while they built their case, which could take months while Sarah rotted in jail and Lily grew up believing he'd abandoned her. Richard pulled out his phone and stared at the contact information for Marcus. One call could end this. Marcus would take a deal, Richard's complete surrender in exchange for Sarah's freedom. He could walk away, disappear, let Marcus have everything if it meant Lily could have her mother back. His finger hovered over the call button. Then he noticed something in the garden. A small piece of paper stuck to the rose bush near Margaret's hiding place. His hands trembling, he retrieved it. A child's drawing in crayon, showing 3 stick figures holding hands under a rainbow. At the bottom, in Lily's careful handwriting, "My family. Love never gives up." Richard stared at the drawing, remembering when Lily had made it during one of their afternoons together. She must have dropped it here during their evidence search. Love never gives up, he repeated aloud. For the first time in days, Richard felt something other than despair. Lily believed in him. Even now, separated, and told he was dangerous, she still considered him family. Margaret had died fighting for the truth. Sarah had risked everything to save his company from Marcus's greed. They had all shown courage when it mattered most. Now it was his turn. Richard stood up, Lily's drawing in his hand, and walked back toward his house with new determination. Marcus thought he'd won by isolating Richard from everyone who mattered. But isolation also meant freedom. Freedom from legal restrictions, from public scrutiny, from playing by rules that Marcus had already broken. Tomorrow, Richard would stop being a victim and start being the man his family needed him to be. At 4 a.m., Richard drove to the original Blackstone Industries building, the modest warehouse where his father had started the company 40 years ago. He still owned the property, though it had sat empty for a decade. Using his master key, he entered the dusty space that smelled of old wood and forgotten dreams. In the corner office that had been his father's sanctuary, Richard found boxes of documents Eleanor had secretly moved here before her dismissal. Her note was brief. The UI, truth always finds a way. Among the papers was his father's journal from 1985, detailing a crisis remarkably similar to Richard's current nightmare. His father had faced a corrupt partner who had tried to steal the company through legal manipulation and false accusations. Today, I discovered that James Morrison has been embezzling funds and bribing city officials to secure contracts, his father had written. He's turned half the board against me and spread rumors about my mental instability. I feel helpless, watching everything I built being destroyed by someone I trusted. But then I remembered why I started this company, not for profit, but to build something honest in a dishonest world. Sometimes a man must lose everything to remember who he really is. Richard read on, fascinated, as his father detailed his comeback strategy, not through wealth or power, but through truth and persistence. His father had spent months quietly, gathering evidence, building relationships with honest investigators, and proving his accusations through documentation rather than headlines. I learned that real strength isn't avoiding defeat, it's getting back up when everyone expects you to stay down. James thought my kindness was weakness. He forgot that kind men can also be strong men when they're protecting their family. The final entry made Richard's breath catch. James was arrested today. The FBI found everything. The bribery, the embezzlement, the manufactured evidence against me. But the real victory wasn't his downfall. It was discovering that I could rebuild trust, piece by piece, with people who matter. I'm keeping this journal for Richard, in case he ever faces his own James Morrison. Son, remember, corruption is always elaborate, but truth is always simple. Richard carefully placed Lily's drawing next to his father's journal. 2 generations apart, the same message. Never give up on family. His phone buzzed with a call from Detective Harrison. Richard, I'm calling from a secure location. We've been building our case against Marcus, but we need more time. However, I found something interesting. Sarah had a restraining order against her ex-boyfriend 2 years ago. Marcus has been paying this ex to create false testimony about her character. Can you prove it? Working on it. But there's something else. I've been in contact with FBI Financial Crimes Division. They're very interested in the Torino connection. If we can get Marcus to incriminate himself with organized crime involvement, federal charges could supersede the local corruption. After the call, Richard sat in his father's chair and made 3 decisions that would define the rest of his life. First, he would liquidate his personal assets to hire the best defense attorney money could buy for Sarah, not the corporate lawyers who played politics, but someone who fought for justice. Second, he would use his remaining business connections not to save his reputation, but to protect Lily. If he couldn't be her guardian, he would ensure she was placed with people who would love her while her mother fought for freedom. Third, he would stop playing defense and start attacking. Marcus expected him to hide, to plead, to negotiate. Instead, Richard would do what his father had done, gather the truth and present it so clearly that even Marcus's corruption couldn't obscure it. Eleanor appeared in the doorway, looking older but determined. "I've been sleeping in my car outside for 3 days waiting for you to come here." "Eleanor, you shouldn't be. 40 years I've worked for this company," she interrupted. "I'm not letting some criminal destroy what your father built. I've got copies of every document Marcus ever signed, every call he ever made from the office, every meeting he ever scheduled. Your father taught me to keep detailed records of everything." She placed a thick folder on the desk. "Marcus made one mistake. He kept detailed notes of his own crimes because he's proud of them. I found his personal files." Richard opened the folder to find Marcus's handwritten plans for destroying him, complete with timelines, contact information for corrupt officials, and financial records of bribes paid. Marcus's arrogance had created the evidence for his own downfall. "How do we use this?" Richard asked. Eleanor smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her since this nightmare began. "Simple. We give it to people who can't be bought, and then we watch Marcus's whole house of cards collapse." The meeting was set for midnight at the Blackstone Industries boardroom, neutral ground where Marcus felt powerful and confident. Richard wore the FBI wire beneath his shirt, his hands steady despite knowing his next few words could determine the fate of everyone he loved. Marcus was already waiting, sitting in Richard's old chair with a satisfied smile. "You look terrible, Richard. Guilt will do that to a man." "I'm here to surrender," Richard said, playing his role perfectly. "You've won. I'll sign whatever you want if you drop the charges against Sarah." "How noble," Marcus laughed. "The great Richard Blackstone begging for his cleaning lady. Your father would be ashamed." "My father understood what mattered, something you never learned." Marcus's eyes gleamed with triumph. "Your father was weak, just like you. Do you want to know why I really took this company? Because I built it while you two played at being honorable businessmen. Every major contract, every strategic decision, that was me. I deserve to own what I created." Richard kept him talking, drawing out the confession the FBI needed. "What about Margaret? Did she deserve to die for your ambition?" "Margaret was getting too close to my operations with the Torinos. She found evidence that could have sent me to prison for 20 years. Marcus leaned forward, his voice cold. "I tried to scare her off, but she was as stubborn as you. So I arranged a little brake failure. Amazing how easily accidents can be manufactured." Richard's hands clenched, but he maintained his composure. The wire was capturing everything. Then Marcus's phone buzzed. His expression changed as he read the message, his confident smile vanishing. "Interesting," Marcus said slowly. "I just received a very informative text from my contact at the FBI. It seems Agent Cross has been surprisingly chatty about your little cooperation agreement." Richard's blood went cold. Marcus stood up, walking to the window. "Did you really think you could outsmart me, Richard? I've had people inside law enforcement for years. The moment you walked into that federal building, I knew about your wire." He turned back with a predatory smile. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to call Agent Cross and tell her the meeting was unsuccessful. You'll say I suspected surveillance and refused to confess to anything. Then you'll publicly announce your resignation from all business activities due to mental health concerns. And if I refuse?" Marcus pulled out his phone, showing Richard a live video feed. The image made his heart stop. Lily in her foster home bedroom, asleep and unaware of the dark figure standing in her doorway. "My associate is very skilled at making things look accidental," Marcus said conversationally. "House fires are tragically common. And Sarah? Well, prison can be a dangerous place for someone with so many enemies." Richard stared at the screen, watching the intruder's shadow fall across Lily's peaceful face. Every protective instinct screamed at him to act, but he was trapped. If he moved against Marcus now, innocent people would die. "You have 30 seconds to decide," Marcus continued. "Your pride and your pursuit of justice, or the lives of the people you claim to love. Choose wisely." Richard's mind raced. The FBI was listening to every word, but they couldn't move fast enough to save Lily if Marcus gave the signal. Sarah was defenseless in jail. His desire for justice warred with his desperate need to protect his family. 20 seconds, Richard. Through the boardroom's windows, Richard could see the city lights stretching endlessly. Thousands of people sleeping safely while his world collapsed around him. Margaret had died pursuing truth. Sarah had sacrificed everything to save his company. Lily had risked her safety to warn him about danger. Now it was his turn to make the ultimate sacrifice. 10 seconds. Richard looked at the wire transmitter on the table, knowing the FBI was listening, knowing that his next words would determine whether justice prevailed or evil triumphed. "Time's up," Marcus said, his finger hovering over his phone. "What's your choice, Richard? Justice or family?" Richard took a deep breath, his father's words echoing in his memory. Sometimes a man must lose everything to remember who he really is. "I choose," Richard began, his voice steady despite the impossibility of the decision before him. "I choose," Richard said, looking directly into Marcus's eyes. "To trust the people who taught me that courage means doing what's right, even when you're terrified." Marcus's finger moved toward his phone. "Wrong answer, Richard." "Actually," Richard continued calmly, "it's the perfect answer. Because while you've been gloating, Agent Cross has been very busy." Marcus frowned, confusion replacing his confidence. "What are you talking about?" Richard smiled for the first time in weeks. "You see, Marcus, your arrogance finally caught up with you. That FBI contact who warned you about the wire? He's been working for Agent Cross for 2 years. Every piece of information you thought you had was exactly what we wanted you to know." The color drained from Marcus's face as the implications hit him. "Right now," Richard continued, "FBI agents are surrounding the foster home. Your associate was arrested the moment he broke into Lily's room. And Detective Morrison, your corrupt contact? He's been singing like a canary about your bribery network for the past 6 hours. Marcus's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, and his face went ashen. The message was from Agent Cross. "Game over. Your entire network is in custody." "Impossible," Marcus whispered. "I control everything. I planned for every contingency." "You planned for the Richard Blackstone who was isolated and broken," Richard said, standing slowly. "You didn't plan for the man who learned that real strength comes from the people who love you." The boardroom doors burst open. Agent Cross entered with 6 FBI agents, weapons drawn. Behind them came Detective Harrison, Eleanor, and Victoria Sterling. "Marcus Aldrich Valdez," Agent Cross announced. "You're under arrest for racketeering, money laundering, conspiracy to commit murder, and the murder of Margaret Blackstone." As agents handcuffed Marcus, he stared at Richard with pure hatred. "You think you've won? This will destroy your company. The scandal will ruin everything." "The company was already ruined," Richard replied. "You corrupted it the moment you murdered my wife and started using it to launder blood money. I'd rather rebuild from nothing than continue your legacy of lies." Eleanor stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Richard's shoulder. "Actually, boss, you won't have to rebuild from nothing. The board met this morning. Once they saw the evidence of Marcus's crimes, they voted unanimously to restore you as CEO and to transform the company into exactly what your father intended, a force for good." Victoria Sterling approached with official documents. "Mr. Blackstone, I have Sarah's release papers. All charges have been dropped, and she's being released with a formal apology from the state. The prosecutor who filed the false charges is also under investigation." Richard felt his knees nearly buckle with relief. "And Lily?" "Already on her way here," Detective Harrison said with a smile. "Agent Cross thought she might want to see justice served." As Marcus was led away in handcuffs, he turned back one final time. "You destroyed my life." Richard looked at the man who had cost him so much, his wife, years of happiness, his peace of mind. But instead of anger, he felt only pity. "No, Marcus. You destroyed your own life the moment you chose greed over loyalty, power over truth, hate over love." 20 minutes later, the elevator doors opened and Sarah stepped out looking tired but free. Behind her, Lily ran toward Richard, with tears streaming down her face. "Mr. Richard, they said you saved us." Richard knelt down as Lily threw herself into his arms. No, sweetheart. You saved me first, remember? I just learned from the bravest little girl I know. Sarah approached more slowly, her eyes filled with emotion. Richard, I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to thank me, Richard said, standing with Lily still in his arms. You need to marry me. The boardroom fell silent. Even the FBI agents stopped what they were doing to listen. Because, Richard continued, his voice thick with emotion, you and Lily taught me what family really means. Not blood or obligation, but choice. Every day choosing to love and protect each other. Will you choose to be my family forever? Sarah's answer was a kiss that tasted like tears and hope, and the promise of tomorrow. In the background, Eleanor dabbed at her eyes while Agent Cross smiled and shook her head. In 30 years of law enforcement, she muttered to Detective Harrison, I've never seen a case end with a marriage proposal. First time for everything, Harrison replied with a grin. 3 weeks after Marcus's arrest, the media narrative had completely reversed. Headlines that once screamed, millionaire conned by cleaning lady, now proclaimed, hero child saves CEO from criminal partner, and love triumphs over corporate corruption. Richard found the attention exhausting, but Sarah handled it with remarkable grace. The most important thing, she told a reporter outside Sweet Sarah's bakery, which had reopened to enormous community support, is that justice was served. Marcus Valdez hurt a lot of people for a very long time. Now families can heal. Lily, meanwhile, had become something of a local celebrity. Children from all over the city sent her drawings and letters calling her brave. She kept everyone. But her favorite remained the picture she'd drawn of her family, now displayed prominently in Richard's office. The transformation at Blackstone Industries was remarkable. Richard had kept his promise to rebuild the company according to his father's original vision. Half of all profits now went to the Blackstone Family Foundation, which provided housing, education, and legal aid to families affected by corporate crime. Eleanor had been promoted to president of operations, and her first act was to hire Sarah as director of community relations. I never thought I'd see the day, Eleanor told Richard as they watched Sarah address a meeting of single mothers who were receiving foundation assistance. She's a natural leader. Margaret would have loved her. The legal proceedings moved swiftly. Marcus faced federal charges that could result in life imprisonment. His cooperation with the Torino crime family had been so extensive that the FBI was using his testimony to dismantle the entire money laundering network. Detective Morrison and 6 other corrupt officials were also indicted. Justice isn't just about punishment, Agent Cross explained during one of their final meetings. It's about prevention. Your case will be studied in law enforcement academies for years, as an example of how citizen courage can expose even the most sophisticated criminal enterprises. But Richard's attention was focused on more personal matters. The wedding was planned for the following month, and Lily had appointed herself chief wedding coordinator. She took her responsibilities very seriously, creating detailed drawings of flower arrangements and interviewing potential cake decorators with the intensity of a corporate executive. The cake has to be perfect, she explained to Richard as they sat in the bakery after hours, surrounded by wedding magazines and color swatches. It's Mommy's special day, and special days need special cakes. What about you? Richard asked. Is it your special day too? Lily considered this carefully. It's the day I get a daddy and you get a family. So yes, it's very special for everyone. Sarah emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of sample wedding cake flavors. How are my wedding planners doing? Lily's making sure everything is perfect, Richard replied, pulling Sarah onto his lap. I think she's more nervous about this wedding than we are. That's because she wants everyone to see how happy we are, Sarah said, kissing Richard's forehead. She told me yesterday that she's been praying for a daddy since she was little, and now her prayers have come true. The intimate moment was interrupted by Eleanor's arrival with a stack of legal documents. Sorry to interrupt, but Richard, you need to sign these final papers for the foundation restructuring. And Sarah, the city council wants to present you with a commendation for civic courage next week. As Richard signed the papers that would permanently transform his company into a force for good, He reflected on how dramatically his life had changed. 6 months ago, he'd been a lonely widower focused solely on business success. Now he was surrounded by love, purpose, and the kind of family he'd never dared to dream of. "Are you happy?" Sarah asked quietly as they drove home that evening, Lily asleep in the back seat. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Richard replied. "Even with everything we went through, the arrests, the media circus, the legal battles, I wouldn't change any of it. Because it led us to each other." Sarah squeezed his hand. "Marcus thought he was destroying you by forcing you to choose between justice and family. He never understood that sometimes you don't have to choose. Sometimes love creates its own justice." The next morning brought news that Marcus had been sentenced to 35 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. Antonio Torino and 12 members of his organization had also been convicted. The judge's statement was clear. "This court will not tolerate the exploitation of legitimate businesses for criminal purposes, nor will it show mercy to those who murder innocent people to protect their illegal enterprises." Richard felt a deep sense of closure. Margaret's death had finally been avenged, not through revenge, but through the patient pursuit of truth and justice. More importantly, her memory lived on in the foundation that would help thousands of families avoid the kind of tragedy that had torn his life apart. That evening, as he tucked Lily into her new bedroom in his house, soon to be their house, she looked up at him with those brilliant blue eyes. "Mr. Richard, can I tell you a secret?" "Of course, sweetheart. I think Mommy Margaret is happy about the wedding. I dreamed about her last night, and she was smiling." Richard felt tears prick his eyes. "I think you're right, Lily. I think she's very happy."